Well, hey, everybody. Happy Wednesday. Getting ready to record Mike in the Midwest episode 77. Jot down a note here and we'll get started. All right, I think we're good. All right, let's get this pulled up here. Dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 dun. Almost there, almost there. All righty, let's do it. Episode 77. Hello to everybody who's watching live. Welcome to episode number 77 of Mike in the Midwest, a mini podcast for the amazing patrons just like you of the Be Our Guest podcast. This is Mike Rallman, host of the Be Our Guest podcast. We're recording this show live here on YouTube, and it is... Let me start this one over because for some reason the TV just started back up. I don't know why that is happening. Let's see. Let me just mute that old bad boy. Okay. Sorry about that. Let's try that again. Sorry if you're watching the video. This is how it goes. All right, here we go. Welcome to episode number 77 of Mike in the Midwest, a mini podcast for the amazing patrons just like you of the Be Our Guest podcast. My name is Mike Rallman, host of the Be Our Guest podcast, and I'm here on Wednesday, December 8th, 2021, with episode number 77 of the mini show here for our great patrons. And in just a few minutes, we're going to talk about a little place called Poplar, Bluff, Missouri. And my fun trips down to this place, I mean, this was an amazing place to visit when I was a kid. When I was told we're heading to PB, that was an exciting time in my childhood here in the Midwest. And we'll talk about the where, the why, the who, and all that stuff. And we're going to talk about this because of an event that happened just last night in Las Vegas, Nevada, that all brings this story together. And I hope you do enjoy these little mini episodes. I know they're not much and they're kind of just Mike rambling along here, but the stories of my life kind of growing up here in the Midwest, and a lot of them kind of connect with things happening in my life today. And we're just kind of a good time sharing that story, and I hope you enjoy it and kind of get a little taste of what it's like here in Missouri. Of course, I do live in St. Peters, Missouri right now, which is kind of fun. We're going to have an upcoming episode maybe next week. I've thought about this one, and I think it'll be a fun one because I'm curious if you feel the same. I want to spend some time talking about the geography of the place where you're planted or the place where you grew up. And I don't want to give too much away because I want to make a full show out of it, but I'm always curious if you are aware or if you are curious or if you think about a lot about the geography and the history of the place where you live. Not only like the geography and the history of the place where you live from the past 50 years, 100 years, but maybe for the past, 500 years, 1,000 years. Like what was in your backyard 1,000 years from now, where your subdivision sits? Are you next to any navigable rivers or, oceans or stuff like that? Great Plains. We're going to talk about that on an upcoming episode because I think I live in a pretty interesting part of the country where a lot of stuff happened. So we'll talk about that. But who knows? I mean, maybe in my backyard nothing happened, but I was one of those kids that had a wild imagination, and I picture things happened not only where I live now, but more where I lived prior growing up and with Pam at our previous house. But we'll talk about that, the geography of where you're planted here in a future show. So get ready to kind of share that and think about that because I know a lot of you, and a lot of you live in very, very interesting places in the world where I would love to kind of explore the history of your town. Because the good news is about being a travel agent is that if I've helped you book a trip, and I'm a geography nerd. I haven't traveled a lot in my lifetime. If you exclude going to Disney, I've done a few cruises, but I haven't gone many places other than a lot of small towns for speed skating and baseball competitions and now cheerleading competitions, which I'm heading to the Dells, Wisconsin. We'll talk about that here in just a second. But I haven't got to travel extensively in my life, which is one of my regrets. And I'm going to try to, especially when I retire, that's kind of my goal is to travel more and more. But when folks send me, their information to book a vacation for them, I get their home address to put into our database. And I always wonder about the places that I see for where folks find us and where folks listen to our podcast. And so when somebody lives in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado, I wonder what it's like to have day by day life out there. What it's like out there in June, what it's like out there in January, or if somebody books a trip and they're up in New Hampshire, like what's that like? I mean, that's got to be such a different way of life than here in St. Louis. Or somebody that books a trip and they're from Phoenix, Arizona. Like, how cool is that? I know well, it's not cool probably at all. Most of the time, it's probably blazing hot. But that climate is so different. And because the climate's so different, the way of life is probably so different everywhere. We have listeners that I've talked to from up in North Dakota. Like, you have to be a hardy person to live in North Dakota. I've already whined about the cold weather here in Missouri, and it hasn't even got to be January yet. A couple days ago, it was freezing down here. And I had to take Riley, the super dog, out to go to the bathroom. And she was, if you have a dog, when the dog is doing the dance before she has to go to the bathroom, I'm like, pick your spot and let's get on with the show. Come on, we don't need the perfect spot. Let's just roll. Let's get this thing done so we can get back inside where it's not so cold. And we haven't even got to the cold weather yet. So the folks that can survive up in, North Dakota, Montana, our friends up in Canada, it's crazy. Like, I just want, and we got folks that live down, we got a lot of listeners down in Florida, down in the Southeast. I always just wonder, like, how does that geography affect how you've grown up and how you live your day-to-day life? Your wardrobe is probably slightly different than what I have in my closet. Your shoes are probably different. I probably have different kinds of shoes like lined up in my closet than you might have. We might have some of the same sneakers, but we probably have different things. It's just kind of funny. What you have in your garage probably looks a bit different. So I know that's kind of deep, but I do wonder about those things. So we'll talk about that, the kind of the geography of where you're planted. So we'll talk about that on upcoming shows. So keep that in your back pocket because really this show is all about the feedback. And I appreciate each and every one of you that takes the time to drop it with some feedback each week because it really does make this show better. It's just a mini show for some fun. But that's kind of it. So today I wanted to give you a feedback on what has been going on over the past week with the Be Our Guest podcast. I hope you were excited to hear Pam and Ricky on this week's shows. We had the listener question show come out yesterday, actually today, as you're listening to this show, if you get it today. And excited to have Pam back. Pam has moved into her new house, which they have been building for the past 6 months, I think. And yeah, what a time behind the scenes. What a time to build a new house during this supply chain crunch. She's been very stressed about that. They had to close over the Thanksgiving weekend, but she had some friends come over and they moved a lot of the stuff and she's finally getting settled. And I've seen a couple of pictures and it looks like she's got everything in the right places. The house looks beautiful on the inside. If you noticed on the chat, when we recorded the shows on Monday night, her studio looks great. And here's the thing. I don't know if she talked about this live on the shows. Her upstairs where all the bedrooms are and stuff like that. See, I don't have that in my house, but her upstairs has all hardwood. She told me it has all hardwood floors except for the room where she records the podcast. She's calling that her studio. So after 13 years of doing this podcast, I got her to call the bedroom where she records the podcast a studio. So that's a win. And also, what did she get in that room and that room only? She got carpet. Yes, for the acoustic value. So look at that. Mike Rallman is wearing off on Pam Forrester. So we're excited. We're always trying to get a better sound for you guys. I know it doesn't always sound perfect, but I do try. Again, I wish I was in their houses to make the sound better. I can only do so much from 1,000 miles away, but we are working on it. And she got carpet to make the room sound better. So that is great. So Pam is doing wonderful. She's still kind of getting things settled, but that's why she's been traveling to Disney so much because they sold their other house and she was living out of a townhouse for the past like 3 or 4 months. And so I told her that her and her husband were living the college dorm life because they didn't have a house. They were living out of a rental. And so I told them to live it up, go down to the the pool at the apartment complex or the townhouse complex, and throw a party, that kind of stuff. They just went to Disney. So that's what she's been up to. Ricky, same old stuff. I think she's been working down in Atlanta. She works for a car dealership, does social media stuff like that. She's doing great, but glad to have her back. I believe she's coming to St. Louis this weekend. They always celebrate Christmas with her husband's family a couple weeks before Christmas. So I guess this is the weekend that they are doing that. Brian, her husband, they're from St. Louis, but his family lives in Jefferson City, Missouri, which if you don't know, you should know from elementary school. Jefferson City is the capital of the state of Missouri. It is in central Missouri, so it's about a 2-hour drive to the west of St. Louis, right in the middle of the state, just south of Columbia, where Mizzou is. And so I think they're heading out to mid-Missouri to celebrate Christmas with Brian's family this weekend. And of course, while Ricky's in town, I will not be here because we are headed to Wisconsin to the Dells. Mallory's first cheerleading competition of this season happens this weekend, Friday through Sunday. So this will be my first time ever setting foot in the state of Wisconsin. So I get to check off another state in my whatever. I don't have like a list or anything, but there I'll get another state under my belt. I will say though, I have seen the state of Wisconsin, but I've never been in the state of Wisconsin, which is kind of interesting. And I know that because I remember way back in the day when I was in high school, we got season passes to Six Flags. Okay. So we had season passes to Six Flags. We have a Six Flags in St. Louis. It's in a town called Eureka, Missouri, which is from my house right now. It's about 20 minutes away. It's about 20 miles west of downtown St. Louis. So it was about where I grew up. It was probably about a 45-minute drive from my house. In the season passes when we were growing up were like dirt cheap. You get a season pass for like $50. So in the spring, what you do is get a season pass to Six Flags. And then when you were broke, you could just go out there all summer, all fall, and just hang out. You didn't have any money. And then you wouldn't eat in the park because the park food was too expensive. You go down the road, you'd leave the park, go down the road to Taco Bell or KFC, get something cheap, and then go back. So that's what we would do. Anyway, the thing about your season pass, though, was for Six Flags was that it got you in any Six Flags around the country. So we wanted to get fancy one weekend, and a bunch of my friends and I went to Six Flags up in Chicago. It's called Great America. It's north of Chicago. It's in a town called Gurnee. And so we went up there, and this Six Flags was way bigger than our Six Flags in St. Louis. It had bigger roller coasters, more unique rides. It's awesome. I want to go back up there someday. But I'm getting old, so I'm not a big roller coaster guy. But it had a cool roller coaster called the Demon. I remember I love that. It was kind of like the Ninja, but it was called the Demon. Anyway, they had this one ride. I can't remember what it was called, but you got in this thing, and it was basically just like an observation tower. You sat in a seat, and it went up around this like pole thing, and you would go up really high, and it would just kind of rotate, and you just looked around 360 degrees. And you were very far northern Illinois. So when it rotated, you were looking out into the state of Wisconsin. That's what they said on the spiel when it, gave you when you were up there. So apparently I've seen into the state of Wisconsin, but that was a neat attraction up in Great America. That was a cool park. So hopefully maybe I can get back in the day. And I don't think it's there anymore because I've done research on it. They had a really cool space shuttle attraction. It had like this it wasn't full size, but a gigantic model space shuttle orbiter outside. And you did kind of a motion simulation kind of thing on the inside. I'm pretty sure that's gone now, but that was one of my favorite things they had at the park. So anyway, I've seen Wisconsin, haven't been into Wisconsin, but as luck would have it, what did we find out this morning is I was on the treadmill running. And I'm back up to 13 miles. I got my first 13-mile run in a month since I've had my concussion from falling down the steps from helping Pam with her surgery. It's been a long way, but I got back to 13. Hopefully I can keep it there till Dopey. I don't know. We'll see. I think I'm going to make it. I don't know. I'm not saying I will, but I hope I'll make it to Dopey this time. But here's the thing. This morning I'm on the treadmill. And I get up at about 5. I have my alarm set for 5:18 every morning. I get up, I get down to the basement, get on the treadmill. I'm down here all by myself. Pam comes in and opens the door to the laundry. I call it the laundry room. It's a storage room where the treadmill is. I'm down there by myself always. Nobody ever comes down there. Scares the stuff out of me because I'm used to being down there by myself. Have my headphones in, listening to a podcast, watching Pluto TV on my iPad. She comes in to tell me that Riley was getting sick in the bedroom because she ate one of her dog toys, was puking it or something. She wanted me to know that, so I keep an eye on her. Anyway, what she tells me, though, is she got a text in the group text message thing from all the cheerleading parents. There is now a winter storm watch for Southern Wisconsin for Friday morning. Guess when we're going to Southern Wisconsin? Friday morning for 4 to 8 inches of snow. So either way, it's going to be fun. We should get to see some snow. We haven't seen snow yet this year. So bonus. Hopefully we'll get up there before it gets too bad and we'll get to see some snow, get some pictures, eat at Moose Jaw, maybe Paul Bunyan's. We'll see how that goes. But excited to get up to Wisconsin, check it out, and go Platinum Athletics. And we'll see if we get a bid to Summit so we can go to Walt Disney World in the spring. Anyway, let's so that's what's going on around here. That's where I'll be this weekend. So if you're one of my guests at the Magic for Less, I will be working while I'm there. I'll have my laptop and be working remotely, but I will not be getting to the emails quite as quickly as I probably would because I will be at the venues cheering on all the teams. But and being a dad, got to be the dad on the weekends. But I will be taking care of business. Speaking of taking care of business, I hope you enjoy Friday's podcast because that's what we're talking about. We're taking care of business like Bachman Turner Overdrive on Friday's show. Yes, we did that show 8 years ago. We did not have the SG scale, so we brought it back on Friday. Hope you enjoy that. All right, so let's go back to last week's show. Oh, one other thing before I do that, I know this is totally crazy and just all over the place. I hope everything sounds good. Again, thanks to your Patreon support, you guys help pay the bills, the hosting, the bandwidth, all that stuff for the podcast, and I appreciate that so very much. But you also, the computer just died after 11 years. This is on the new computer. I also used some of the Patreon money to the hard drive on the old computer crashed. And so I had the folks at Micro Center. They were able to recover the old hard drive for $150. They got in there. They pulled all the files off the old hard drive. They saved all 2,000 episodes of the Be Our Guest podcast. I had most of them backed up to the cloud, but I hadn't had like the last 50. And they had some random files, like some artwork. They had the intro for Mike in the Midwest. I hadn't had that backed up. I just forgot to back that up for some reason. I didn't have it with the Be Our Guest podcast stuff. So we got everything backed up again, got a new 1 terabyte external hard drive. It was like $50. Your Patreon support. This is the new computer. You guys, this is your computer that we're recording the podcast on. So I hope it sounds great, but I want you to know I'm a good steward of your donations every month, your support of the show. And I thank you so much. And I hope you continue to donate because it really does help support the show. And I hope you always enjoy these Mike in the Midwest episodes. That's not really what you're donating to. I hope you always think that you're helping keep the Be Our Guest podcast going because the efforts are for the big show, but I want to always give you this show just kind of keep you updated with what's going on in my life and the Be Our Guest podcast and just some fun stories once a week. What's going on? Who cares about Poplar Bluff, right? You're probably like, it's a small town in southern Missouri. We'll talk about that in a second. Let's get to feedback from last week's show. I talked about the clock radio my grandpa gave me and how that might have led to the Be Our Guest podcast. Jennifer Perry has some feedback and she says, "Hey, Mike, thanks for this week's assignment. I tried to reminisce about my grandparents and the great memories I have visiting them when I was a kid. The relic that I claimed from their house after they passed away is a bright yellow metal tea kettle with a lid. It'd be junk to anyone else because the lid is no longer attached and there is a black dent in the side where the kettle was accidentally tossed out into the tea bags. My grandparents both lived through the Great Depression, so they never replaced anything that could still be used. When I was little, I thought the black dent was a picture that was there intentionally. I still have the kettle, but I have retired it to the top of the cabinet with some other treasures. P.S. I still have a used clock radio with red digital numbers as a backup to my phone alarm." I know those relics, and that's really what they are. And I do want to do a show on some of the relics that I have laying around that are worthless to anyone else, but they're priceless to me. I want to do a whole show on that because I have a few of those things besides grandma's cookie tin, which I talked about. But that's special, right? I mean, it is, our grandparents, most of us, I would say most of us probably have lost our grandparents at this point. If you're my age, I'm in my upper 40s, but I haven't lost my grandparents, right? They live in my heart, and I try to carry them on with some of the sayings that my grandma and my grandpa said. I try to keep some of the knickknacks that I kept from them around just to see. They're not practical things like like I said, the cookie tin, some other things, the clock radio. I wish I had. I don't have that, but I have a memory of it. And the show, in a way, kind of keeps my grandparents alive because I get to share some of their stories, and I share them with my kids. That's the thing that kills me, though, is that my wife got to meet my grandma, who was awesome. Pam got to meet grandma, and she was incredible, but she never got to meet Grandpa. Grandpa passed away in 2001. And Pam and I taught together in 2001, but we didn't start dating until 2002. So she never really got to know Grandpa. And I wish she could have, because Grandpa was my hero, and I have all these stories and I show her all these pictures, but I just wish she could have met him, and I wish Grandpa could have met Pam, because man, Grandpa would have loved Pam, because my wife is awesome. She's spunky. She is just like the kind of woman that he would have thought was so cool, because she's smart. She's everything, but she's just a great mom. It's just one of those things. It's like, I wonder about that a lot. I was like, they didn't intersect. Like, Grandpa passed before he got to meet my grandkids and my wife, but man, would he have liked to have met my grandkids, or his grandkids and my kids, my two daughters. He would have loved them. But I'm sure he's looking down on them. All right, Dennis, my good buddy, has a feedback here. He says, "Hey, Mike, excuse me. So I actually have a clock radio on my bedside table. After listening to your show, I realize I've had this same clock radio for going on 26 years now. It has the red glowing numbers and a dial to tune in local radio stations. I've taken it with me from 3 different apartments and 2 houses. It works like a charm, so I see no reason to replace it or get rid of it. As for family heirlooms, I have one that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Over 20 years ago, I bought my first house. When I did, my father drove me down to Texas from St. Louis to help me paint and do some work before we moved in. He brought this old rickety ladder with him. While we were working on the house, he told me that he was leaving the ladder behind and I could not get rid of it. I learned that it was his grandfather's ladder, and it was passed down to my grandfather, then to my father, and now to me. The thing is, you can't really use this ladder. The wood is in good shape, but the nails and hardware are loose. It is several decades old. I never met my great grandfather, but this ladder meant a lot to my dad and my grandpa. They're the type of men that can figure out how to fix just about anything. So I'm keeping the ladder for sentimental value, but I use a more modern one anytime I need to do anything around the house." I love that story. That is awesome. That is great, Dennis. Thanks for sharing that. I appreciate it so much. And the funny thing is, here's why I'm laughing. I'm laughing because I'm scared somebody's going to come to your house. Somebody totally has no idea about that ladder, and something's going to break. Some cat's going to get stuck on your roof or something, and they're just going to go for this ladder, right? There's the ladder, just jump on that ladder, and all kinds of bad stuff's going to happen, right? Because it's just like, it's the ladder to them, not knowing that it's some decades old ladder with sentimental value, but not practical. Oh my gosh, that is so BB. I just like, hey, there's a ladder, and I'm jumping up on it, and boom, bad things happen. But that's great. I love that. I love that, Dennis. Thank you for sharing. I love stories like that. That is so cool that you got that heirloom passed down from person to person, generation to generation. That's great. Len Wilcox, thank you so much for the feedback. Hey, Mike, my favorite family heirloom is a spinet upright piano. Sorry if I said that wrong. I don't know. My mom initially purchased after a car crash settlement that her, my dad, and I were in the 1960s. No seatbelts, so we all went flying when the person ran a stop sign in front of us. I learned to play music on that piano. Later played the trombone. She passed down the piano to me, her eldest, where my kids learned to play music. I have now passed it down to my daughter, where her kids are learning music as well. P.S. You sound great to the unprofessional ears. Thanks, Len. That's awesome that you got that. That's so cool that the piano is going from generation to generation and passing on a love of music. Because think about that. When you learn to play music, and I was an educator, and I truly believe this, that there's a connection between musical talent and mathematics. I believe that there's patterns there. And I'm a person who is not a musician. I cannot play any instruments. I can play a CD player. I was a DJ. I could play turntables. I couldn't even do that. I played CDs and tapes and queued up stuff on the computer very well. I was a good DJ, but I couldn't play music. Now, my dad is an accomplished drummer. He played in all kinds of bands. My dad is a very, very good drummer. He's very much, great at playing music. That's why we get along with Scott. Scott is also #ScottyG is also a drummer. And so they both like the same kind of music. Scott likes like the Beatles and all the, that kind of stuff. My dad was a program director of an oldies radio station. I keep telling them they need to hang out. They would get along great. Anyway, I think that's great though, that like that piano has not only sentimental value, but think of how it's enriched your life and how it's enriched your kids' lives. And it's just like it also has a story. Like it has a story. And think about the days before seatbelts. Like, I feel old because I remember my first car. Again, I talk about it a lot. My grandpa helped me put together the MG. It was a 1971 MG we bought for $500. We bought it from a guy just down the road from where I live now. But back then, that was like way out in the country. Like I remember we went way out in the country to get this MG, and it was sitting in the middle of a field on blocks. It wasn't running or anything. We put it on a trailer, brought it back to his grandpa's garage, and we worked on it for about 5 years until I turned 16. And then it was running. We painted it and stuff. But the funny thing is, like, I never wore a seatbelt in that thing because in an MGB, to take the top down, it was a convertible, obviously, and to take the top down, you had to take the seat belts out. Like, we had to physically disconnect the seat belts. And so a lot of times when I took the top down or put the top back up, I just never reconnected the seat belts. I just jump in and go. So it's a miracle that a lot of us are alive. It's crazy. All right, Trisha Hellwig also jumping in here with some feedback. Thanks for being here, Trisha. She says, since it is the holidays, a favorite heirloom I inherited from my grandma was a plastic Santa head you hang on the wall. Okay, I gotta go on because that sounds a little scary. It was a motion sensor, and every time someone walks by it, it yells, "Ho, ho, ho, Merry Christmas." It has one volume, loud. We love to see unsuspecting people's reactions. Also, curious about your background music selection. You had mentioned about talking about it behind the scenes. Just wondering where you find the music and how you chose it. That was in the last week. I'll be honest. Okay, what happened last week was I did not have the intro to Mike in the Midwest because it was on the crashed computer, but I have now recovered it from Micro Center. Thank you. I just talked about that. So the one that I made last week though was I think I used Road to Tomorrow, which was a part of the intro loop to Epcot way back in the day. And you could also hear it, I think, in the Future World. There was like a Future World background loop that had I think it was Road to Tomorrow. I think that's what I can't remember exactly, but I'll have to go back and listen to it. But yeah, so that is what I use. I collected a bunch of loops years and years ago, and I just pulled it from that. All right, so let's talk about Poplar Bluff for about 10 minutes before we get out of here today. I don't want to go too long because this is a mini podcast, not a maximum podcast. And the reason I thought about this show today is because last night my dad called me at 10 o'clock at night. And when your dad calls you at 10 o'clock at night, and your dad's getting older, he's only 20 years older than me. I'm 48. He's 68. But still, when he calls me at night, I get a little worried. Like, well, okay, what's happening? I hope he doesn't have a kidney stone, something like that. He calls me. He's like, you watching? I'm like, oh my God, what am I supposed to be watching? No, I'm watching the news. I'm getting ready to go to bed. It's 10 o'clock. I get up at 5. He says, Coy has won. Okay, so let me tell you who Coy is. And I posted this on social media last night late. Coy is my nephew. Actually, he's not really my nephew. He's kind of my nephew. My cousin. So my cousin Chris. So I have two cousins on that side of the family. My dad has one brother named Randy. And my uncle Randy has two sons, Chris and Derek, my cousins. And Chris has one son named Coy. And Coy's is about 20 or so, 20, 21, something like that. And he is, ever since he's been a little kid, he has been a cowboy. And I mean that because he's grown up in this little town called Poplar Bluff, Missouri. Now he doesn't live in Poplar Bluff, in case he ever listens to this. They've moved out of Poplar Bluff in the last 5 to 6 years. They live in another smaller town than Poplar Bluff at this point called Eminence, Missouri, which is about 20 miles north of Poplar Bluff, which is, in the middle of nothing in Missouri. It's in the middle of the Mark Twain National Forest. But Poplar Bluff is a small town. Eminence is like a super small town. Anyway, though, to make the long, convoluted story just a little bit simpler, my kind of nephew, who I'm very proud of, he's grown up a cowboy because my cousin Chris, who, when I was a little kid, we were like brothers. I love seeing Chris. He is a great guy. I didn't have a brother. And so Chris, we spent every Christmas together. We spent all holidays together, every Thanksgiving, every Christmas. We were always together. And I love seeing Chris and Derek. They were always, when they came up from Poplar Bluff for holidays, it was awesome. You look forward to that every year. So Chris, But he was a cowboy too. He lived because Randy, when he got married from St. Louis, he went down to Poplar Bluff, Missouri, because that's where his wife was from. In Poplar Bluff, if you don't know, it's down kind of in the boot heel of Missouri, which if you look on a map, if you look down in the southeast corner of Missouri, kind of by Arkansas and Kentucky and Tennessee, down in that corner, it's one of the smaller, actually, it's one of the larger towns in that corner of the state. Cape Girardeau's the biggest, right on the Mississippi River. But Poplar Bluff is a little bit west of that, but it's at the intersection of Interstate 67 and I think 63. It's not a very big town. I think it's about 60, 70,000 people, but it's the only, it's the big area around there. Anyway, that's where my cousins grew up. It's where my uncle and aunt lived down there. So that's where Coy was born, and that's where he's grown up his whole life. And he's a cowboy. Anyway, my dad calls me last night. Coy won. So Coy won what? My nephew, my kind of nephew. Well, he's a cowboy, I said, and he rides rodeos. And he's been riding rodeos for about over 10 years. I know that because I've watched him since he was a little guy. I mean, we've gone and watched him ride rodeos. Shoot, Paige was like 6 or 7, and she's 25. So he's matter of he's I don't know how old he is. He's been riding rodeos for quite a long time. Quite a long time. I can't even add it up, but he's been riding quite a long time. And so, because I have stories about rodeos and Paige, because she's a city girl, and one of the rodeos, they had all the kids could go out and they put like a rope on or some kind of like thing on a calf's tail, and all the kids had to try to get the thing off the calf, and if you got it, you got like $50. And Paige was scared to death when the thing ran at her, and all the other kids are, they're country kids, they're trying to tackle the thing. She was just trying to get out of the rodeo ring. Anyway, it was hilarious, and she was little then. Coy was at that rodeo. So anyway, he is a team roper. Now, if you don't know what team roping is, if you've ever seen a rodeo, so rodeo is obviously the big thing is to ride bulls. He's not a bull rider. That'd be kind of cool. He's a team roper. And what a team roper does, there's kind of two, if you've seen like, that kind of event, there's an event called bulldogging, where they let the calf or the steer go. Like they have a little chute and the little steer goes flying out. And then the cowboy's on the horse. And when you're bulldogging, the cowboy jumps off the horse and like, grabs the steer by the head and like flips him over, just grabs him kind of and flips him over. And that's it. That's when the event ends. But my nephew does team roping. And what that is, that's two people. Obviously, that's why it's called team. And there's a steer or a calf and the little chute between them. And they hit the button, the chute opens, the little calf goes running out of the chute. And then the two cowboys are on the horses, and one of them's what's called a header. That's what my nephew is, Coy. He's the header. And then the other guy is the heeler. So Coy has to real quick, boom, catch the head with his lasso. And then the other guy is the heeler. He's got to catch the back two legs with his lasso. And when they get that and they pull it, that's when the clock stops. And so what you got to do apparently this week out in Las Vegas, Nevada is like the Super Bowl of rodeos. It's called the National Finals Rodeo. And you got to qualify to get out there. So you got to win all these events throughout the year to qualify for the big National Finals Rodeo in Las Vegas, Nevada. And it's on the Western Channel. It's on TV every night. So he made it. He was ranked all year in team roping. And so he made it out there. And then last night he won. He won his go round. He got to do a victory lap in the Nationals final arena, the Nationals final rodeo. He got interviewed on TV. So we're pretty proud here in the Rallmans because he's Coy Rallman. And he won, just so you know, this is not small stakes. Just for that run, which took 4 point some seconds, $27,000 purse. I was like, oh man, I need to learn how to team rope. Now he's been doing this for, forever. So I'm sure, you got to pay in to get that kind of a purse, but yeah, it was pretty exciting for us. So anyway, Poplar Bluff, let's talk about that. When I was a kid, like I said, we didn't travel much. We didn't go many places, but when we would get to go somewhere, one of the places I always loved going was to Poplar Bluff, Missouri. And again, like I said, it's in southern Missouri, southeastern Missouri. And we would go down there because my grandma and grandpa would want to see my Uncle Randy. That was their son. It was my dad's brother. So we would go down there for the weekend sometimes and stay at their house. And when they went down, I would go with them a lot of times. And my sister Jill would go with us. And so we would go down. It's about a 3-hour drive right down Interstate 67, Highway 67. And we would have the best time because life was so different down there. We would get there and it would be Chris and we'd just have a good old time. So it's a very country place. You might think Missouri's very country. I live in a very suburban place, considering Poplar Bluff. When we got to Poplar Bluff, they lived in a place that backed up to a bunch of trees, like a forest. And my cousins always had like four wheelers or three wheelers. So one of the things I always did as soon as we got there was we always rode four wheelers and three wheelers. I mean, we rode those things. They'd run out of gas. We put gas in them. We'd ride them again. We rode those things for hours because we didn't have those in St. Louis. They were illegal. There's no way we could have ridden four wheelers or three wheelers where we lived. But we rode those things like crazy. They also had BMX bikes. We had BMX bikes, but they had like dirt tracks down in Poplar Bluff we'd ride on. Real dirt tracks because my cousins raced BMX bikes for a while. Also, one of the things that we went to in Poplar Bluff, which we didn't really have in St. Louis at the time, and this was really exotic, they had Walmart. I know that sounds so crazy, but back in the day, I remember the Walmart that we went to and it had these old timey letters out front that said WALMART. It was almost like old timey font. It wasn't like today, like when you go to Walmart, but it was like a big store. And it was just so cool because we didn't have one where I lived. And so you go in there and they had everything. I also remember they did not have places like, I remember when they got their first Taco Bell, it was such a big deal. They didn't have Taco Bell, but they had a place called Taco John's. And so we'd always go to Taco John's. We went to Poplar Bluff. And then my cousins, so they lived in this first house that was out in the woods and, four wheelers and all kinds of stuff. And, we did all that for a while. That was when I was real little. And the house was just really cool. I remember that you probably had this growing up, right? Where your cousins or your friend or something, they always had stuff that you wanted, right? I mean, they might not have been better stuff, but it was different stuff. And it was always stuff that you're like, you wish you had as a kid. That's what I want to hear about too for next week. Like, what's something a cousin had or a friend had? And like, you're like, oh gosh, if I just could have had that. And it probably wasn't any better. It was just different. So my cousin Chris, and they were a little bit more well off. My uncle was a real estate agent. He did a little bit better financially probably than our family was, because my dad was a cement mason. He was a laborer. But the thing is, the thing I remember about my cousin Chris's room when we went down to Poplar Bluff was that he had a race car room. And he had, if you ever saw in like a catalog, he had the bed that was a race car. Like the frame of the bed was a race car. And then he had a lamp that hung over his bed that was like a race. It was like it almost looked like a red, green, yellow light. It was his whole room was themed like to racing. This was like when we were like 7 or 8. And I just thought that was the coolest thing. Like no kid could have had a better bedroom set. And he slept in a race car every night. I was so jealous of that. I was like, oh, it's so cool. My cousin Chris has it all. So we got, and of course he had four wheelers, three wheelers, and all that stuff. Eventually they sold that house. It was out in the middle of nowhere. They moved kind of closer into again, I always thought it was funny because in Poplar Bluff, they said they were going into town. Like if you want to go to McDonald's, you had to go to the bank, you had to go to Walmart. You went into town. Do you guys say that? My in-laws say that. They live in a town called Moscow Mills, Missouri, which is about 35 minutes from where I live. It's north of St. Louis. And they live in a subdivision a little bit out. But if they're going to McDonald's or anywhere, they say, oh, we're going into town. Anybody need anything? They're only going about 15 minutes up to McDonald's, but they say they're going into. Anyway, that's what they said at Poplar Bluff. So they would always be like, we're going into town. Well, they moved closer into town. And actually they moved they moved to a house that was on the golf course because my uncle's a big golfer. My cousin Derek was a big golfer. He actually went 4 years to college on a golf scholarship and he is a great golfer. And they moved right to a house that was right on the golf course. And I just remember after that, when I went down there, we would, go swim at the swimming pool at the golf course. And like, I didn't have any of that stuff in St. Louis. We'd drive the golf cart. I thought that was fun. We'd go to the driving range and we would do, hit golf balls and we would just have a good time, going up to the country club, clubhouse, whatever it was called. But it was just so fun to go to Poplar Bluff. And the thing is, Poplar Bluff wasn't exotic. It was small town. I mean, it was smaller than St. Louis. And it was just a hop, skip, and a jump south of us, about 3 hours in St. Louis. It's not a destination on anybody's map. Nobody goes to Poplar Bluff probably for a vacation. But as a kid, when you didn't travel much, it was literally a whole new world. And it was my cousins that I got to see, and we got to have all kinds of adventures. It didn't matter really what we were doing. We were exploring in those woods on the three-wheelers and four-wheelers. We were, playing games. We were, playing, when we played golf, it wasn't, real golf. We were just messing around out on the golf course because they knew the folks that ran the golf course. But it was just, it was such a different environment than what I was used to growing up that it was fun. So here's what I got a couple questions for you for next week. So we can talk about this in the feedback section. One is like, again, what is that thing that maybe wasn't better, but was different that you always wished you had, but you never did, that maybe your cousins or your, friends had over at their house? But also, is there a place that you used to go to that was really kind of fun? But like looking back, if you told somebody like I went there, you're like, you're crazy. Like that was fun. Because if I told somebody, let's go to Poplar Bluff, Missouri this weekend, they'd be like, why? Like, why would you intentionally go to Poplar Bluff? It's not exciting. But it was when we were kids, man. It was great. It was, I mean, we didn't get to go anywhere. So going to Poplar Bluff was amazing. I got to hang with my cousins, and there was a lot different to do. It wasn't a lot to do. They had a skating rink called Skate City. It was cool. Like it was just a little bitty tiny skating rink, but it was cool because it was different. We had such a good time down there. And I have fond memories of Poplar Bluff. And I still to this day, I bought my Jeep that I drive right now. I bought it in Poplar Bluff from a guy that my cousin knows. I drove all the way down there to buy it from him because he said, my friend will do you right. And I said, let's do it. Let's go. And I bought it 11 years ago from him down there, and I still drive it. So anyway, how about some feedback? Drop in anytime this week. I appreciate you guys. I hope you're having a great week. I know we went a little bit long. I apologize for that, but we'll be back again next week. So check out all the pictures on Instagram and Twitter. I'll be in Wisconsin. I'll post some snow and some cheerleading pictures this weekend. Until then, stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll see you real soon.